My name is Mike Rigby. I am the lead member at Somerset Council for Planning, Economic Development and Assets. And we have today with us as well members of the subcommittee. We have Sarah Wakefield, we have Liz Lyshan, and we have Richard Wilkins. So welcome to you all today. Today's meeting will be run using the webcasting system via Microsoft Teams. Committee members and key officers are physically present in the Luttrell Room here at County Hall. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific items or observe. This meeting is being webcast and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. The agenda pack with papers is available via ModGov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. When you're invited to speak, please could you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anybody listening and so that they can identify who is speaking. The meeting will be audio recorded. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. And at that point there just reminds me, I remembered a couple of days ago that I once collected all the agendas when I was a Somerset County councillor for a year and stacked them on top of each other, and they were taller than me. So I'm very pleased that we're now doing everything electronically. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Bill Revens and Councillor Graham Oates. So subbing for Councillor Revens is Councillor Liz Lyshan, and subbing for Councillor Oates is Councillor Sarah Wakefield.
And thank you both for substituting today. Item 2, minutes from the previous meeting. Just to confirm the accuracy of the minutes from the 13th of August, have we all had a chance to read and digest, those of us who were present, any issues with them as drafted? No, good. I think we can record and accept those as an accurate record of that meeting. Thank you, Tracy. Item 3, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest in relation to items on the agenda beyond the normal things that we already have noted? No declarations of interest. Public question time. I know that we have a number of public questions today. Thank you to those who have questions for showing an interest in what we're doing here at this subcommittee. The first item is Mr. Colin Fisher, who's the chair of Stoke St Mary Parish Council, who wants to ask a question about the local plan, I understand.
Well, it's not so much a question. You will all have read the paper that we sent in, I hope. And if you've read that, you'll know that there is a degree of frustration in the process of developing the local plan. The frustration comes from the experience of the councils that I represent, who have gone through a process of local plan development in each of the districts and share a number of frustrations. Mostly, the frustrations are about being ignored. These are people who've been through developed neighbourhood plans. Some of them take 6 years to do it, and then they find it has no impact on the development of the local plan. Now, you're in a different position. You're in a position where this is the first Somerset-wide local plan, and so you have a chance to make a better plan. And in our view, a better plan is one that focuses on places rather than simply trying to meet arbitrary housing targets. You have to meet the targets, we understand that, but we believe there's a better way of doing it. And the better way of doing it draws on the intimate local knowledge that is present in every parish, whether it's developed a neighbourhood plan or not. We don't have a neighbourhood plan in Somerset, Stoke St Mary, but I know every inch of my parish and I know what it needs. The people who've done neighbourhood plans have gone through it in detail. So there is a store of knowledge there that if you draw on it, you will end up with a better plan. Now, our view as to how you draw on it is very simple. You have, at the moment, you have the conventional call for sites that you need to have because it's in the NPPF. So you're doing that. You will have gone through 1,500 sites, as I understand it. You'll have made some selections, or your planners will have made some selections as to what they think are appropriate sites for development. What we would like you to do is to open up that set of data to everyone else. So that at the end of the call for sites, when you've made your selections, we would like a consultation. Maybe it takes a month. If it takes a month, so be it, because it's a way of getting a better plan. So either you get a better plan by going through the process, or you end up with a plan that meets the housing targets, but has a great deal of aggravation built into its execution. You will end up with a plan that has more legitimacy, and you will end up with a plan that is better, just simply better. And that's what we would like you to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher, for that contribution. And I understand that Kate's going to provide a response.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And I believe I've provided a written response already, but I just would like to kind of clarify some of the points in that response. So all councils in preparing a local plan will have statutory stages of consultation, and that consultation is available for all parties to contribute to. And the statutory stages are set out in what's called our local development scheme. Again, standard document that local councils have to produce. What may not have been clear in the response that I provided to you is that the Housing, Economic and Land Availability Assessment, which is shortened to HELAR, we're great with acronyms in planning, is the document that we will publish at the end of the year, which will provide all the sites that have been submitted. However, in publishing that and making it available to everyone to scrutinise, it does not infer any planning status on the sites that are in there. It is a high level of assessment that will say these sites are not suitable for progressing in the local plan, but these sites are suitable for further and more detailed assessment. But the sites that are going forward for further and more detailed assessment, again, does not infer any status on those sites. And it doesn't mean to say that they will ultimately end up in the local plan. So you'll be aware that we've had about 1,600 sites submitted to the council. The team are currently reviewing those sites, and that is where that initial high level assessment will be undertaken, and against kind of very obvious constraints in terms of flood zones and special protection areas and triple SIs. But that will be published at the end of the year. We don't do a formal consultation on that, because again, it's just a high level assessment. It's a piece of evidence that informs the next stage for the local plan. The statutory consultation period is Regulation 18, and that is when every party has an opportunity to feed in their comments on the sites that have taken through into the draft plan. Following that consultation, the responses are reviewed, and then the Regulation 19 consultation that is prior to us submitting the plan for independent examination is the kind of final stage of kind of consultation. And then we submit the plan to the planning inspectorate, and that is when effectively it's in the hands of the planning inspectorate to independently assess all the evidence, all the responses that have come forward on the sites, and to give an overall view on whether the plan is sound to go forward for adoption. So I hope that allays some concerns that these sites will not just suddenly appear in a plan. You will get to see them when we publish the Housing, Economic, Land Availability Assessment. And then, of course, you'll get the draft plan for public consultation with the sites that have gone forward in that draft plan.
Yes, briefly, Mr. Fisher, if I can just add before you do that, I hope that goes some way to allaying your fears that the next stage is kind of a done deal. There are still quite a lot of hurdles still to be jumped over, at which I think all town and parish councils will have further opportunities to participate. But please.
Yeah, I understand that. Actually, I was looking through a file of mine before I left. It was the SHLA for Somerset West and Taunton, and it's that thick. And if you go through it and you look at what has been developed since then, you will find a whole bunch of things. The best example that I can think of is the Brookfield site in Rushton, which is the next door parish to me, which I think that was a travesty, that whole process. What I want to avoid is the sense that I ended up there angry, which is why I'm sitting here, although we don't have a neighbourhood plan. That's why I'm sitting here, because I ended up feeling that the process left a very well developed neighbourhood plan, which literally took 6 years in the making, adrift. It was irrelevant. It was dismissed. Even the objections that Somerset Council put up to the development, which was outside of any previous agreement, it contained not a shred of anything that was in the neighbourhood plan. So yes, I understand the statutory process. Yes, I understand there will be consultation. What we want is a recognition that what parishes think is critical to the plan, not peripheral.
Thanks for that additional comment. I think as the person who guided through the first neighbourhood plan in Somerset in Bishop's Lydeard, I'm very keen on the concept. And I think it's probably fair to say that the earlier neighbourhood plans have probably been more influential than the later ones, largely as a result of things like the changes to the National Planning Policy Framework last year, which vastly uprated the housing supply numbers. So in the next local plan, we're being asked in Somerset to find space for 75,000 new homes over 20 years. I mean, it's an astronomical number, and one with which I frankly have some quarrel. And I've taken the opportunity, just so you know, of the appointment of a new Secretary of State at MHCLG to suggest that the number's not a sensible number to aim for. It's too big. It's taken since the dawn of time until today for the population of the Somerset Council area to reach 580,000 people. And I have no idea why government thinks that that's going to increase by a further 30% in the next 20 years. I don't know where those numbers come from. So we have written to the new Secretary of State to challenge that, or at least to try and provide some justification for it, because, you know, we have huge numbers of constraints in Somerset, not the least of which is a large part of the centre of the county has a tendency to flood from time to time. We have 4 AONBs, all sorts of other constraints, the national park. It's a very large number to be able to satisfy. So, you know, if we absolutely are forced to do it, we will have to do that. But I think there is a process by which we need to understand better why the government thinks that number is so large. So it will be the case, I'm afraid, that local plans across the county, and including neighbourhood plans, will not entirely be adhered to because of, for example, the lack of a 5-year housing land supply across the council area and the tilted balance that then comes into operation. So none of us, frankly, are probably getting exactly what we thought we might have done when these local plans were first put together. But I fully accept what you say in terms of the importance of the input of parish councils into the next stage, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that your voices are heard in that process. Thank you. Next, we have Isabel Beacom, the planning chair on behalf of Wedmore Parish Council, to talk about the neighbourhood plan there.
Chair, members, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. My name is Isabel Beacom and I have lived in Wedmore for 26 years. I want to stress why neighbourhood plans remain critical for rural communities like Wedmore. The government's planning and infrastructure bill emphasises speed, 1.5 million homes and fast-track decisions, but that comes with risks for villages like ours. Neighbourhood plans are the local safeguard. In Wedmore, we don't have the capacity of a city region. We have narrow roads, limited public transport, stretched GP surgeries, a rural landscape, and that people value deeply. Our neighbourhood plan reflects those realities. It identifies where modest housing growth can be absorbed without damaging the parish. It safeguards green spaces and village character. It ensures development is proportionate and infrastructure-led. For a place like Wedmore, the neighbourhood plan is the only tool that gives us a genuine say in shaping growth. There are risks in the new bill. The bill introduces spatial development strategies, housing targets issued from the top, and greater delegation to planning officers, which will strip parish councils of meaningful input. It also elevates national development management policies, potentially overriding local and neighbourhood plans. This sits uncomfortably alongside the government's own Pride in Place agenda, which claims to empower local communities. If neighbourhood plans are to be simplified or sidelined, local voices will carry less weight, not more. It's worth noting the new CPRE Somerset report, which calls for a brownfield first approach to protect our village green and grey belt. This is exactly the kind of policy we would champion, yet it risks being drowned out by a system chasing delivery speed above all else. For Wedmore and parishes like it, the neighbourhood plan are not optional extras. They are safeguard that ensures growth is sustainable, infrastructure keeps pace, and rural identity is preserved. My request is simple. As the Planning and Infrastructure Bill develops, the formation of the new Somerset local plan, or any planning matter, please champion neighbourhood plans. They're the only tool parish councils have to make sure rural voices are not lost in a rush to deliver numbers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for your passionate support for neighbourhood plans and for the protection of our rural neighbourhoods, and again to Kate for some initial comments.
Thank you, Isabel. So just to kind of help expand kind of knowledge on the local plan. So we have commissioned a local housing needs assessment, and that will help inform in terms of the starting point for the housing requirement for the council plan. It also breaks down that housing requirement into specialist housing groups such as older persons housing needs, and it will clarify the level of affordable housing requirement in the policies that we might want to take forward. I understand the concerns about neighbourhood plans and the status that they have in decision making, and again echo Councillor Rigby's comments. But I would stress that the National Planning Policy Framework that the government has set is very clear that in order for neighbourhood plans to benefit from being able to control the housing that comes forward in their area, they will need to have made specific allocations that meets the housing need in that area. And unfortunately, many neighbourhood plans don't do that. So in that event, you have very limited weight that can be given to the policies in a neighbourhood plan in terms of controlling specific sites coming forward. I've put a full written response that will be available on the website and will be circulated for your colleagues to see. And there's a link in there to the National Planning Policy Framework and the wording that is very clear from government policy. And what you often find as well is that decisions then will, if they're not granted, will often go forward to the planning inspectorate, where decisions are then overturned at the local level.
Thank you very much, Kate.
May I just speak a second?
Yes, please.
So you're doing a new housing needs assessment. So our neighbourhood plan is nearly 5 years old, so it will never be able to include the new housing needs assessment. So our neighbourhood plan will be ignored. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, the neighbourhood plans aren't ignored. They are part of the development plan. But what is often the case, communities feel that means that they've got a level of control over the housing sites that come forward in their community. And unfortunately, unless your neighbourhood plan has very clear housing allocations that meet the housing requirement for your community, you'll find that it will have limited weight. So it's not to say that, so if you've got specific design policies in there, they will influence and be part of the development plan, but it's not a blanket restriction on housing just because a neighbourhood plan exists, unless of course it's made very clear allocations that meet the housing requirement for your community. And unfortunately, in many cases, neighbourhood plans don't do that. And in that eventuality, you will find that sites where there's a lack of 5-year land supply will need to be seen in a more favourable light.
Thanks for that, Kate. Would it be fair to say, Kate, that this is a good example of why neighbourhood plans need to be kept up to date as much as local plans?
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic example where local plans become out of date beyond 5 years, and then if we can't demonstrate a 5-year land supply, which is the case, as Councillor Rigby explained, because we've seen a 41% uplift in our housing requirement, local planning authorities then have what's called the tilted balance, where there has to be very clear reasons why you are refusing the application, and it needs to be seen in a more favourable light. And unfortunately, that's where sometimes communities can get frustrated with the planning process. But these are national requirements. And if the decision isn't made locally, the decision will be made by the planning inspectorate in the appeals process, which is it's exactly what happened with the Brickfield site nursery that Colin Fisher raised earlier.
Thanks very much, Kate, and thank you, Isabel. I hope my words to Mr. Fisher gave you some comfort, in as much as we are trying to defend the position of our council area against the government where we don't agree with them, and we also have a continuing desire to support neighbourhood plans and their extension across the council area as well. But thank you very much for your contributions today. Next up, we have Harriet Chappell on behalf of Queen Camel Parish Council with a question about the call for sites. Hello.
Apologies that you don't have my statement. I did submit it. I'm not sure Tracy didn't get it. I'm actually not going to go over the whole thing again because I'm here to repeat a lot of what Colin and Isabel have said. However, just to pick up on a couple of the specifics in terms of your response, you talked about producing a draft local plan with the outcome of the call for sites. That makes me nervous that it is a draft call for plan that already has the sites in it that you have taken forward. And I think what we as parish councils are asking for is an opportunity to comment before the draft is published, so that the draft is at least goes some way to reflect what local parish councils know about their areas. So, for example, if I can give you an example from Queen Camel, when our local plan was written, so 2019, we had just under 300 houses in the village. And we stipulated that we were going to be looking at 30 new houses over a 5-year period, or indeed over a 10-year period. And planning permission was granted for 43 houses. So that's a 14.5% increase in the size of the village. And we know only internally by talking to the chap who owns the field that he has submitted as one of the call for sites another field. And if he gets his 30 houses, we would then end up with a 20% increase in the size of the village. Mr. Rigby, you talked about the government saying that you need 75,000 houses over 20 years on 75,000 over 580,000 people. That's about 13%. So we're talking about a tiny village where we are. We're looking at a 20% increase in the size of the village. We've already got a high street, as Mr. Rigby will well know, that is dominated by massively overweight HGVs and a massive over-reliance on too many HGVs coming up the high street. If we're then having to have another 30 houses, what's going to happen to the character of these villages? That there seems to be no understanding that actually these villages are small rural communities. New towns are great. Go and build new towns. We've got a completely full doctor's surgery. We've got an almost full school, which is doing brilliantly. I completely understand that you're at the behest of central government, and it's nice to know that you are pushing back, because it feels like you're being told what to do and you have absolutely no recourse to do things any differently. But we have our Somerset councillor who comes to our meetings telling us that he's resigned from planning committees because he's so outraged at what the planning committees are being asked to do. And I think a very, very loud message needs to get back up the tree, that it's not reasonable to expect local villages to increase in size by 20% over the course of 5 or 7 years without somebody really coming to understand what they're actually asking of the local communities.
Thank you very much for your question. And just to be clear, I think we might have slightly confused house numbers with population. So the Somerset population is 580,000 and the number of houses we're being asked to accommodate 75,000. I've done a quick fag packet exercise. So if there's 2 people per house, it's 150,000 or so.
72,000 households.
Yep.
in Somerset.
Okay, 272,000 households, and we're being asked to create another 75,000. So that's my 30%. So I think we're being asked to increase the population by about 30% over that 20-year period. That's what I have a problem with. I just don't see that that's likely or necessary. And if you put that in simple terms, it's something like building 4 new Froomes. You know, Froome's the 4th biggest town in Somerset, and we're being asked to find 4 new ones in 20 years. I can't see that as being a sensible or necessary step. So that's the pushback. But I'll just hand over to Kate for some more further reply comments.
Thank you, Harriet. And I did receive your questions, and I've drafted a full response to each of the questions that you've posed. Happy to go through those now, but just to kind of reinstate what I explained to Colin's questions, we will be publishing all the sites at the end of the year in what's called a housing economic land availability assessment. That is a key part of the evidence that underpins the local plan. So those will be in the public domain for everyone to see and to view. It's not a consultation. The consultation stage, and it's a statutory consultation stage where everybody has the opportunity to input, is at that regulation 18 stage. And I fully appreciate that parishes might want to have a head start on that, but that would not be reasonable to give. But the sites will be published, so you've got plenty of time to have a look at those sites and to consider what you might want to do to respond to the draft plan if those sites make it into the draft plan. And that is an if. Do not assume that just because they're identified in the HELA that they will then make it forward to the local plan. And I totally understand the nervousness of communities around this, and the frustrations that you feel that nationally there's little control in communities. It's a big issue nationally with the shortage of housing and a big push from government to increase the supply of housing because of the housing crisis that we face nationally. But those sites will be published for you to view ahead of the draft plan coming out the following year. I've got a full response to all of your questions, but if there is any further information that you need or clarification, do let me know.
The only other point I would comment is about employment opportunities. In our neighbouring parish, Mudford, they've got 760 odd houses going to be built between Mudford and Yeovil. And my understanding is that part of that's meant to be about employment opportunities, but the developers have been asked that phase get pushed back to once X hundred of houses has been built already. It feels like everything is slightly falling apart. You're going to create hundreds of more houses, but actually where are all these people going to work?
Yeah, I mean, again, I understand the concerns. We have this strange situation where sometimes it's the house builders that control the employment land. However, I would also like to emphasise that a large proportion of housing is to meet older persons' housing needs as well, and they're not part of that workforce. And we know that there is going to be a much longer, we're all living an awful lot longer, and our housing needs will be quite different in the future to meet those housing needs for older people. So it's not just about people needing a place to work, it's about people needing a home that meets their lifetime requirements as they grow older as well.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, briefly, if you would, we're a little behind schedule.
Question to Kate is, when you say that in developing a neighbourhood plan, we need to be able to meet the assessed needs in each parish, how do we know what they are? I know what they are for county, but I've no idea what they are for me.
Do you housing needs survey?
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do a local housing needs survey,
Well,
but again, in the response, and all the responses are published, I've provided the link to the National Planning Policy Framework, and I've copied the key paragraph for ease of reference, so you'll be able to see what, in order to give that weight for your neighbourhood plan, what you need to be able to demonstrate.
we've done that informally, and I have to tell you it's 10 houses. So you're not going to be happy with that as a number. Just an observation. I read I've been through the NPPF and I looked at the route at which they derive numbers. If you think politically, the government is committed to filling a gap. And what they've done is they've taken the gap and they've turned it into a set of housing needs over a 5-year period, not over a 20-year period. And then they've said, And by the way, you've got to do this 20 years, which is a piece of nonsense. If that doesn't fall over at some point, I'll be amazed. But anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Fisher. I think that's the point that I was trying to make about our rejecting the number that we've currently been given. I think it's worth just saying that I'm afraid that planning, as much else in local authorities, is being seen increasingly as a delivery agency of central government rather than what I would call true local government. But that's, I'm afraid, a path we've been on for some time. I don't know if we'll ever reverse it. Councillor Wakefield.
I just wanted to add, because I'm the lead member for adult social services and housing, that it's societal change. Just remember that it's not, these people don't all need homes, because we've got lots and lots of single people living separately now from when they used to be together. And that is causing a huge issue on our home finder register, which this morning is now up to 12,000, nearly 900 households waiting for homes. Well over 50% want a single person property. And that is one of the changes. So it's not just people living longer, it's the type of properties they want and the way we are living in our society. And that, you know, that's something that could be addressed in one way or another, but at the moment, it doesn't seem to be changing.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Really interesting stat that about over 50% being single person dwellings, and worth noting. Thanks very much to the three of you, genuinely, for showing interest in what we're doing here and for coming along to have your say. And we'll try and take on board to the greatest degree that we're allowed to the comments and views that you've expressed. So thank you very much. We did have a fourth question, but Mr. Kerry has received a written response, so we're going to skip that and we'll move on to item 5, which is the making of the Ilminster Neighbourhood Plan. And I'm handing over to Anne Rhodes to take us through that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rigby. Good afternoon, councillors. I am your substitute, Jo Wilkinson, today, who's in a planning inquiry. And it's Jo that has been the point person for the neighbourhood plan. So if there's any questions I'm unable to, sorry. If there's any questions I'm unable to answer, I can take them away and bring you back a written answer from Jo. But certainly if you've got general questions around the neighbourhood planning process, I should be able to help with that. So before you today is the Ilminster Neighbourhood Plan. That was originally submitted to South Somerset Council in December 2021, and then they did a further update in 22. That was subject to consultation between May and July in 2022 and underwent independent examination in February 2023. Given the complexity and the number of modifications recommended by the examiner, it was agreed with the Town Council to have a longer period of time to complete those changes, and that technical editing was completed in May this year. And the modified plan was the decision to take the modified plan to referendum was then undertaken in June, and the referendum was held in August. And 83% of those voting voted in support of the plan. Ilminster Neighbourhood Plan, it contains 11 policies around matters like historic environment and biodiversity, facilities for the community, an environmental employment zone, policies around economy and tourism, quality of design, access and movement in and around the parish, types of new homes, and sites within a development area, as well as design and layout. And they've produced some supporting documentation around the character of Ilminster, a design guide and an implementation strategy as well. The neighbourhood plan has been through all the statutory processes and key decisions. So there are no legal grounds by which we could refuse to make the neighbourhood plan, but we very much welcome your thoughts on the Ilminster Neighbourhood Plan and any questions or queries you may have before we move to the recommendation before the committee, which is that the Ilminster Neighbourhood Development Plan is formally made part of the statutory development plan to be used in determining planning applications, the preparation of master plans and provision of pre-application advice for areas within the neighbourhood area, which is the whole parish of Ilminster.
Okay, any questions from anyone on what you've heard and read? Liz?
Chair, I think we should just applaud the tenacity of all those involved in the Ilminster Neighbourhood Plan. It's obviously been a protracted process. I'd be interested in the turnout for the referendum, if you have that figure. I may have missed it if I have. So.
I can look up the exact number if you bear with me a moment, because it will be published on our website. So we published the results of the referendum. So I will just try and quickly look that up and hope that I am right, and it is on our neighbourhood planning page, which is where it hopefully should be. So sorry, my internet connection is a little bit slow.
Got it here, Anne.
Oh, thank
And a
you.
turnout of 779 voters, which represented 16.76% of, which
I
is,
think
it
from
isn't
what I've seen
unusual.
is that about if there's nothing else at the polls on the same day, presumably that would probably reduce the percentage a bit.
A low turnout for these things isn't unusual. And August probably didn't help either, I would imagine.
Sarah?
Yes, I also would like to congratulate those who've had the tenacity to see this through. And I'd just like to echo slightly what was being said by our questioners that earlier on, that if you do all this work and then you think that it's not going to in fact influence in the way you want, it is incredibly disappointing. And I think that the ability to actually put a local neighbourhood plan together is so hard, and so many parishes, particularly the smaller ones, have just said, I just can't do this. We haven't got the skills, we haven't got the ability to do it. All the people who are prepared to set aside up to 5 years to get it, it takes a long time to do it. But I think it's a good idea that people are asked, but I do think it's important that the government, and I'm really talking about the government here, takes note that people want their views to be taken into account, and they want the neighbourhood plans that they've worked so hard on to actually influence the way we develop more than they currently do. And I'm just asking for that to be taken into consideration.
Thanks, Sarah. I think it's a good point, and it's maybe something that we can perhaps work with town and parish councils on with regard to lobbying MHCLG to make sure that those neighbourhood plans as adopted are as fully as possible implemented. But thank you for that. And Richard?
Yeah, no, I wasn't unimpressed with the 16% for a referendum of this nature. However, I just wondered whether there was a breakdown on the number of postal voters compared to. I'm happy to have that as a written response if it's not at hand, but I think it would be a very interesting aspect to see whether it is indeed the thought of having to go to the polls on a single issue that might have meant that postal voters may be higher or lower. I'd just be intrigued. Thank you.
Thanks. I doubt we'll have that to hand, but we'll see what we can find. I think I'm right in saying that we've probably seen council by-elections with a lower turnout than that. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily planning that's turning off the voters. All done on item 5 then? Thanks very much, folks. And thank you to Anne. Oh, we need to vote on it, don't we? Thank you very much. Yes. Can I have a proposer, please? Liz, seconded by Richard. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And thanks for the reminder. Item 6, the local plan 6 monthly update report. And we have Laura here to guide us through that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a report to note as opposed to a decision, and to update councillors on the progress of the local plan. The last report was back in February, and that was when we updated the local development scheme. So we've got the local development scheme timetable set out at the beginning of the report, and we are working to that timetable currently in the evidence gathering and early engagement stage. The evidence gathering is the sort of slow process, and there's lots of work to go into that. The table 2 shows the pieces of work which have been completed. So the first 4 have been completed and published. They are on our website, and the remaining documents are in progress at various stages. So I've given an indication of when I hope or we sort of expect them to be completed. Sometimes things slip for various reasons, but there's a close enough indication of when we think they're going to be available. And then beneath the table, we have a list of a few further documents which we haven't yet started work on, but are forthcoming. Consultation engagement members were presented with a report in August about the engagement, so I won't need to say too much about this, but that set out the early engagement summary that we undertook earlier in the year. The call for sites process, which we've talked about already this afternoon, where we are expecting to publish the housing and employment land availability assessment by the end of the year. And then I've summarised some duty to cooperate discussions that have been going on with our neighbouring authorities, in particular with Dorset Council, where we're working towards a statement of common ground. And we'll aim to do that with a number of neighbouring authorities and infrastructure providers. So our next steps are to progress further evidence base, further work on the call for sites in preparation for the HELA, and develop our vision and objectives. And we have some further engagement with members, such as the cross-party member steering group. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Any questions or comments? I think Liz just got there first, Sarah.
I want to ask, if I may, please, and I'll be asking it on behalf of my colleague, Councillor Heather Shearer, as well. We're both of us really concerned about sufficiency of school places, secondary school places particularly. And I wondered, how does that play out, that need for sufficiency, which is our responsibility? How does that play out within the work of the local plan? So all of infrastructure, Heather particularly keeps talking to me and she keeps saying, I'm not getting it yet. I don't understand where infrastructure comes in as well as development of housing. How does that work? And then particularly because of issues in Taunton and other places, and where housing development's been held up by nutrient neutrality in some areas, and so population has grown in some parts of Somerset, like North Somerset, not North Somerset, but what was Hedgemore, more than so all of that sufficiency of school places that we thought we understood a few years ago now looks different. So how can we be assured that that will play out through the local plan, please?
Thanks, Liz. Good question. Anyone want to take that? Kate.
Yeah, so as part of preparing the local plan, we also, in the wealth of evidence that underpins the local plan, one of them is the infrastructure delivery plan. So that will look at all infrastructure requirements, and that more detailed work happens when we determine where the future site allocations are going to be. In terms of secondary school provision, we then will consult our education colleagues to understand what the key issues are. But of course, don't forget that's at a particular point in time, and we know that there's been secondary school capacity issues with like the NHS doing a big recruitment drive, which has meant more families have moved in. There are other key kind of infrastructure projects that might mean additional pressures that get placed in local areas. And of course, the key challenge for Taunton is it's reached that almost kind of tipping point where you need to provide a new secondary school alongside the housing requirements. And there is a site that's been identified in those allocations, but it's not necessarily a site that would be in an appropriate location relative to where some of those kids are coming forward. So it's the time scale for finding some of these solutions is always a challenge when it comes to actually delivering for secondary school provision, and we know that it's quite a big upfront cost as well, meeting that secondary school provision. But the infrastructure delivery plan is what will underpin the local plan, and then there's always ongoing conversations with colleagues as of when development comes forward.
Liz.
I'm just looking at table 2, So where am I seeing the infrastructure assessment?
It's underneath table 2 in paragraph 5. It's one that hasn't yet been
Okay.
commissioned, so it's forthcoming.
So that's forthcoming evidence base, so it'll be in there. Okay, all right. If we see this again, can that be more obvious, please?
Yes, of course.
Thanks, Liz. All good? Okay.
Well, because I just see infrastructure delivery plan, so I quite welcome brackets and then what that includes, and because a lot of us don't come with any kind of planning background at all, but we're all division members and we're all hearing both from our parishes, as we know, but also from our colleagues who've got particular developing expertise, like Heather with school sufficiency, and I wouldn't know as a member, typical or atypical, what infrastructure delivery plan would include.
Okay, we'll make sure that we have a bit more explanation in any future documents. Sarah.
Thank you. I was just going to ask a bit about what was being asked earlier on about the call for sites and the process, which I've obviously known we've got to a certain stage now. I thought, and I may be wrong about this, that local parish councils were asked to say what they thought about what sites should be developed in their parish. I thought they were all asked, because I asked, I mean, they knew the call for sites was happening, and I thought they were asked to identify what sites they considered were suitable for development. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know otherwise. That's why they're all saying it's developer led, because they're saying all you're doing is asking people who've got sites to promote, which they may or may not own, of course, that they would like to see come forward. So do we ask local parish councils?
We asked everyone. So
Yes.
any single member of the public, organisation, club, carnival organisation, anyone could put forward. You don't have to own the land. You don't have to have any interest in it whatsoever. That any individual or parish council could say, well, that would make a great housing site, or we think we could get some employment land over there. So everyone's had the opportunity to do that. I think it's probably fair to say that the majority of bids will have come from people with direct interests in land, but the request, the call was not only to landowners, developers, it was to everyone.
Might the local plan identify other sites that haven't been bid for or not? Might it say, we think this is a good place to have a new town or village or whatever it happens to be?
Yeah, I think that there's an opportunity to do that, although you do have to be careful. I'm always mindful of a site in Bishop's Lydeard that was in various local plans over the years for housing, and everyone just assumes that because someone's land is identified, that they'll rush to the bank with their planning permission or with their designation, and the landowner just wasn't interested. He was quite happy farming it. And so you do have to be careful. You have to make sure if you are going to designate something that hasn't come from a direct call, that there has at least been a proper dialogue between the council and the landowner. But I think it's fair to say again that most of the designations, I would think, will come from things in the call for sites rather than stuff that we've magicked up ourselves. Is that a fair comment, Kate?
We have had some sites that have been put forward that aren't controlled, but the person who's put it forward does not control or own the land. So yeah, we did give the opportunity for that to happen. But I think you need to be aware that we will need to demonstrate as part of the local plan that these sites are deliverable. So we will need to engage with the landowners to understand, are these sites genuinely available for development? And that's where sometimes things can be, maybe will fall off that list.
But bearing in mind the number of houses that we're now being asked to get, we've got to have enough sites for that to feed through. And I mean, if we didn't have enough, supposing we went through them and we said, well, actually only 800 of these are really going to happen, we'd have to find some more, wouldn't we? Because otherwise we wouldn't have enough in the plan.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. As things stand, we've been given our instructions effectively by central government that that's the process that we're going through. You know, the 75,000 number is the number. There is a parallel process by which we're saying, really? How do you justify that? But as things stand, the work that we're doing is to achieve that goal. We won't be deviating from that until and unless we get some kind of derogation from the government on that.
And just to say, the other thing I don't think you actually said when you were replying to them about it was that we will now go through and say, right, that one's never going to get permission or whatever, it's not going to be put forward, and these are. But the people who have their sites not put forward, they can appeal, can't they? They can go through a process of saying, I think you're wrong. Can't they do that?
Absolutely. It's not really an appeal, but this has to go through an examination in public in front of an inspector, and disappointed bidders, let's call them that haven't made it into the draft plan can turn up and say, well, we don't think you've got enough. We don't think they're deliverable. Our site's better, all of these things, and make a case that they ought to be included in the plan. And I suspect, well, Kate will correct me if I'm wrong, it's not wholly unusual for most plans to probably chop and change a bit as it goes through that process.
Yeah, but for that very reason, really, you'll have particular sites that have been promoted that for whatever reason have been filtered out, and they will then obviously respond to the draft plan with an objection that their site's not being included, make the case for why it should be included. We will need to reconsider those representations, and ultimately, if we decide the evidence does not support including it in the plan, their case will then go forward to the planning inspectorate, and they may ultimately conclude that the site should be included. And this is where all of that evidence underpins the sites that are submitted, and we need to be very clear that the sites that are put forward are deliverable, and there'll be a whole host of consultants arguing on the other side that they're not, and this is why these sites should be included. And they will be putting forward their evidence to support their case, and that's the kind of point of the independent examination, really, to balance up what the council's position is against those that are objecting to what we've put forward as the draft plan.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, go on, Sarah.
I think the difficulty is, as I say, I worry about the fact that the kind of general public think that the whole thing is developer-led. The point is, if you aren't a developer or somebody who might develop a site, why would you be saying you must? I mean, I think it might have been helpful had we been able to say, and I'm not sure if you can do this, look, the numbers of houses we've got, virtually every village is going to have quite a development of, I don't know, 8, 10, depending on the side of the village, houses in it, in order to reach this number. So it's no good you all saying we don't want any here because we don't want to change, because that's not going to happen. And I thought it was in either Somerset or part of either Somerset or Dorset that they'd kind of said to all the villages, you're going to have houses, because otherwise we're never going to meet the target. And I worry about the fact that people think, oh, it's just developers pushing these sites. But actually they're saying reasonably, this will be the land that could be developed. And so it's not an unreasonable thing to do for a developer to lead it, because they're the people who are actually going to do the work. And I think that's that kind of thing that's gone into the public mind, that developers are out there saying, right, we'll have your village and we'll put 20,000 houses or whatever it is the wrong way of looking at it.
I think that's fair comment, and that's the point of the process of filtering through those 1,600 bids, and by no means all of them will make it into the final draft. There'll be plenty that will fall by the wayside and permanently. So there's a process to go through to find the best way of meeting that number. It's inevitable that that's going to have a sizable impact. I don't think we can avoid that. Even if we substantially increase every town and village in Somerset to the maximum, we're probably still not going to meet 75,000. I think the idea of there being some new settlements is very likely, but we're away from that at the moment. We won't know until next year. But either way, whether we try and incorporate all of the new development in existing towns and settlements or even half of it, I think it's fair to say that pretty much every town and village, those that are in a sustainable position, there are some very small ones clearly that aren't going to be suitable, but most of the larger towns and villages are going to have to take a fair proportion of that as things stand. Richard.
Yeah, I was intrigued by your paragraph 5 and in particular the transport modelling, exactly what that will look like, and how it actually, how much weight it will have if it, for instance, is in conflict with our approach of decide and provide, as opposed to predict and get the words. Predict and provide.
No, it's something else.
Something and validate. I was going to say
vision and validate.
Vision. I didn't want to say victim validate. But yeah, vision and validate is similar to decide and provide. It's a similar way of looking at things. But obviously transport modelling as a sentence speaks of predict and provide. So could you just give me a bit of weight behind what actually transport modelling means in this context?
I think it's fair to say that we haven't got to that stage yet, Richard. I think the key thing is determining where the future allocations are likely to be, and then what work we need to do to underpin and support the sites to kind of evidence that they're deliverable. But we'll be working closely with transport colleagues to determine what level of work needs to happen. And of course, we'll have to work very closely with National Highways to understand key junction capacity, to ensure that we don't have holding objections for them as part of the local plan. But I see that Sam's come on the big screen, so she might be able to give you some further information.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. And thank you, Chair. I don't have further information at this point, but what I can say is that we're exploring opportunities for transport modelling that isn't a predict and provide approach. So something that's a bit different, and working with partners to understand what that looks like at this point. That whatever we do will have to be agreed with National Highways, and approach will have to be agreed with them. So we'll walk through the process over the coming months just to understand what that starts to look like, and how we're going to develop that approach. I think it's challenging, and we've raised this with Department for Transport, that the vision-led, vision and validate, decide and provide approach, whichever you call it, is new, and all of our tools and techniques are quite old and are based on predict and provide. So just starting afresh on this whole suite of tools is going to be quite challenging. But we're working on it with partners, and have flagged to DFT that it would be helpful if they gave us some guidance on way forwards.
Thanks for that, Sam. Okay, Richard and Liz.
I just want to say, Chair, the recent process we went through in former MENDEP, following the JR and the MENDEP local plan part 2 and the revision, from a local member point of view, I find that a very helpful process that we went through, in a workshop model where we had huge plans of each settlement, with all of the possibilities on them, and the opportunity for us to feed in both positive and negative views as local members. It was a good process, and it was well received. I see Councillor Helen Kay is online. She may have a different view, but I was in the room at every opportunity, as were most of the MENDEP colleagues, and we did find it a hugely useful exercise, and I hope that it was useful to officers too.
Thanks very much, Liz. And that's Helen's opportunity to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I did think it was useful, and it sort of concerns me that we're not going to be able to do that for this new local plan going forward, it seems to me. And so I've got two questions. One is about process, and the other is quite specific about the evidence base that is on the playing pitch strategy and built sports facilities. I'll mention that first, because in a way that's the simplest one. I've been approached by a lady who works for, she set up something called Make Space for Girls. And she said that when you do a pitch strategy and built sports facilities, usually you use standards that are done by an organisation called Fields in Trust. And that says like about how many sports pitches you need, how many muggers, children's playgrounds, etc. And pointed out that on the whole, the sports pitches are used 80% of the time by boys, and that there isn't a sufficient amount of provision for girls. And I just want to make sure that when we do equalities assessments, which I should think we'll do for some of the parts of these different aspects, that we do make sure that when we look at open space provision, that we have made sure that we are also providing for girls who tend apparently to want spaces to meet where they've got seating facing each other. big swings. Even teenage girls like big swings, yeah, so all sorts of things like that. So that's my first question. I'm happy to go offline to discuss that with the planning officers if that's easier than answering, because that's kind of fairly minor compared with my second question. Do you want to take that now, or shall we deal with that offline, and shall I go on to my second question?
No, we'll manage that now, I think. So we
Okay.
had those events that you and I attended, Councillor Kay and Councillor Leishon at Frome Town Hall last year. I think it was last year anyway, or the beginning of this year. And I think they were really interesting and useful. There will be further member engagement as we roll on down the road towards Reg 18. And so I can't say it will take exactly the same form, but there will be another opportunity for you to engage in the form of the development that we end up designating to meet those numbers that we have. Anything else to add, team, on the first question? No? Okay, let's go to the second one.
Okay, well, my first question was actually about the sports facilities and the open spaces for girls. That was actually my first question.
Let's just pass over to Laura for some comments on the sports issue.
Okay, I'm happy to take it offline though if need be.
Well, thanks, Councillor Kay. Yeah, I'll just quickly say that my colleague who's leading on this, I'll put her in touch with you. She's very familiar with the Make Space for Girls works, and she feels very passionate about that. So I'll put you in touch, and you can have a good conversation with her about that.
Okay, thank you. So going, if I may, Chair, go on to my second question, which is about process and the sort of sections of this. I understand in terms of policy development, and I've mentioned this before, that we have various pressures on us. So we know that the Planning and Infrastructure Bill could end up designating local policies for us at a national level, which is crazy, but yes, that may happen. We also know that certain things from the evidence base will come in, and that will pressurise us to have certain policies about where to put employment, land or whatever. But I've mentioned before that I think there will be some wriggle room, and I'm just wondering, like, at what point we as councillors, unitary councillors, can input into some of that policy development. Now, I understand that and I am actually a member of the cross-party group that's going to be, and I'm just getting up here what it says about the role and purpose of that group, the cross-party local plan group, and it says it's going to be informal to work with officers to support the council's local plan, the local development scheme, development plan documents, supplementary planning documents, monitoring documents, etc., etc. It's an advisory body, not making formal decisions, and it's going to be quite discursive, which I think is great. So we actually get to really sort of hammer things out. That's fantastic. What I want to know is, will that also include some policy development? And if not, I'm just wondering where will be the opportunity for councillors to input into some of this policy development. So that's my first point about process. I've got a second point, but does someone want to come back to me on that first, or shall I carry on?
Okay.
Yeah, the straightforward answer is yes, it will involve policy development. So you'll be able to input and contribute to those discussions.
Okay, thank you. That's great to hear. And the other thing was that picking up on, we actually had a member briefing, I think it was just last week. And I think this paper must have gone out before we had the member briefing, because the slides for the member briefing had a bit more detail than this one. And it included some sort of overarching vision. It was all draft, and some overarching sort of objectives or guiding principles. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I think I've got some notes actually. The first draft objective was efficient use of land. And in that briefing, I asked about, does this include looking at density? How is that measured? Is it measured in terms of economic terms? Is it measured in terms of spatial sort of density? Is it measured in other terms? And then the second one was climate resilience. And the officers, said several times that they were going to be obviously looking at places that flood where we can't build, or coastal areas that may, all kinds of other things. But they were not necessarily looking at food security or adaptation, or putting things like trees upstream so we have less flooding downstream. All of those other things that also feed into climate resilience. And then my colleague Dave Mansell said, do we actually need a separate evidence base on climate? climate work to see, you know, how we can actually improve resilience, climate resilience. And it doesn't look in your list under item 5 in the paper that we've got anything looking at climate resilience. So I'm wondering, either we need an evidence base there, or we need to run it past colleagues in the climate department. Now, that climate department's gone down from 18 to 2.5 officers now in the past 2 years. There's not massive capacity there, but somebody somewhere needs to, I mean, we've just heard that this draft is going to be run past the transport colleagues and probably run past economic development and other departments. Are we going to run it past the climate team? I believe it hasn't gone to them yet. And or are we going to do a, as Dave asked for, Councillor Dave Mansell asked for, and a separate evidence base around climate resilience? Thank you.
Kate.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, we do work closely with our colleagues in the climate team. We have joint officer meetings where with economic development colleagues, environment, where we're sharing the information that we're gathering and the work that we're doing so that these different work streams align. In terms of climate resilience work, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that there's a limit to what the local plan can do in terms of addressing some of the current challenges that we've got in terms of climate change. And there'll be other pieces of work that the council may need to progress and consider that will help inform the local plan, but the local plan itself can't necessarily be the sole document that's responsible for addressing, for example, food security. But part of protecting land and making good, efficient use of land for meeting future development needs, obviously part of that is ensuring that we're protecting the best and most versatile agricultural land. So those things are considered, and some of these wider issues will be discussed as part of that member steering group. But yeah, we work very closely with the environment colleagues to understand and make sure that these evidence bases are aligned and that they're informed of the work we're doing and we're informed of the work that they're doing that can help inform the local plan.
Okay, can I come back, please?
Yeah, briefly,
Mike,
please.
Mike, thank you. It's just that our climate strategy, sorry to go off piste a bit, but the climate strategy has been downgraded at the moment. We don't know what's quite happening. It's sort of all in abeyance. And the indications that we've had are that we're going to look in-house to try and get our own emissions down, but we're now not going to be looking necessarily at Somerset to try to meet the 2030 targets. Well, I'm not really quite sure. And the latest I heard at a full council meeting, when it was a meeting before last, I think, when another councillor, might have been Dawn Denton, asked a question about this, was that all other departments in the council will take on the responsibility of doing some climate change work, and they're all going to be working together to do this. So we all move together to take this into account. So I'm just a bit disappointed to hear that there's a limit to what we can do when and that we're looking mainly at where we're going to put housing. I thought that a local spatial plan was about use of land generally, not just about where we're going to build all these houses. Although I appreciate we're under tremendous pressure, but it also needs to look at where we're going to, you know, what else we're going to do with the land, and climate resilience is fundamental. So it's just a different approach, I suppose, a different way of looking at things, and I need to be clear about what the council is doing generally on this. Anyway, sorry, I'm musing.
No, thanks for that, Helen.
Thank
And
you.
when you say that you're disappointed to learn that there's a limit to what the council can do, I gently say welcome to local government 2025. I've known this for some time. We will, though, make sure that the policies and designations that we put forward through this plan are climate proof. You know, that it's not something that we've changed our minds on. I'm not sure where you've got the idea that we're going to sort of do away with our climate change strategy. That it will trim and adapt as we go, but it remains a key part of our council policy and of the administration's priorities, and that will remain the case with regard to the development of this local plan.
Okay,
So I think, thanks, Helen. I think that brings us to the end of item 6. There's nothing for us to formally vote on here, as we're just being asked to note the comments of the report. So note away, and we'll move to item 7, the forward plan. Who's going to take us through the forward plan? Anyone? No one's taking us through the forward plan. Does that mean we haven't got a forward plan? Maybe we can just do that by email. It's not the most exhilarating part of our agenda. Mike?
Chair, if I can, any items for this committee would be included on the overall executive forward. So we can certainly share a copy of that with you as members, but clearly all the exec members in the room will already be familiar with that.
Indeed, perhaps we could just ping that around to the rest of the distribution list for the meeting as per the invite, which was quite extensive, as I saw after I'd explained that I was going to be a few minutes late. I think I told the entire world. So there we go. Yeah, if we can do that, that'd be great, Mike. Thank you. Which brings us to the end of the meeting. So with that, I will formally close it. Thank you, everyone, for attending.